Nancy Drew Mystery Stories number 17, The Mystery of the Brass-Bound Trunk, by Carolyn Keene. Copyright 1968, Simon & Schuster. Chapter 1, 2 NDs. "All visitors ashore!" shouted a steward. "All visitors As the call to leave the Winschoten faded away in the distance, there was a hum of excitement on the ocean-going vessel. Bells were ringing, and the ship's horn was bellowing out short blasts. "Goodbye, Tatsien!" passengers called to those on the pier. 3 attractive girls stood together, leaning on the rail and watching the people on shore, who were waving. One was Nancy Drew, a strawberry blonde who had sparkling blue eyes. On her right stood pretty Bess Marvin, a slightly plump blonde, while on her left was Bess's cousin, a slender, athletic girl who enjoyed her boyish name, George Fane. The 3 girls were about to sail from Rotterdam in Holland to New York City. Along with other passengers, they waved and shouted goodbye to those on the pier, although they knew no one. Suddenly, Nancy's attention was directed toward a man on the dock. He was using the sign language for the deaf and finger-spelling a message to someone on the ship. His hat was pulled low so that she could not distinguish his face. Nancy watched his fingers move quickly. She was fascinated. Then, in a moment, she was startled to see him spell out the words Nancy Drew. 2 years before, Nancy had learned the entire finger alphabet, but had forgotten most of the letters except those that spelled out her own name. How strange, Nancy thought. What does he mean by that? Bess and George were looking in other directions and did not notice the man. Nancy kept trying to figure out the rest of his message. After a short pause, he started again. Deciphering the letters she did know, Nancy pieced out part of a sentence. It read, "Beware Nancy Drew and N.E." She could not decipher the last part because her view was obstructed by someone. Nancy, an amateur sleuth, looked up the deck to see if she could find anyone on board who was signaling in the finger language. She noticed no one, because the crowd of people along the rail blocked her view. Curious to solve the puzzle, Nancy leaned far out over the rail and turned to gaze along it, hoping to get a glimpse of someone spelling out words. Without warning, she felt her feet slipping and her balance going. She tried to steady herself but could not. She would fall into the ocean below. Bess turned to Nancy just in time to notice that her friend was in trouble. With a great yank, she pulled the girl back. "What were you trying to do?" Bess asked. "You gave me a terrible scare." Nancy smiled ruefully. "That was silly of me, but a man on dock was talking to someone on board in the deaf sign language, and he signaled a warning about me." "What?" George and Bess exclaimed, taken aback. "Where is he?" George asked. Nancy looked toward the spot where the man had been. "Oh," she said, disappointed. "He's gone now." "What are you going to do?" Bess asked. "Well, if he talked to more than one person, the others might still be conversing in the finger language. Maybe we can find them." George spoke. "You don't even know which deck these people might be on. If you really want to find out, I suggest we split up and do a little sleuthing." "Good idea," Nancy agreed. "Suppose I stay here. Bess, you take the lower deck, and George, you go to the one above. If there are 2 or more deaf people together, they might still be speaking in the finger language. I'd like to know whom the man on the dock was talking to." Bess and George hurried off. while Nancy continued to look around for suspects. She saw no one and kept thinking about the words she had translated. She was not on a case. Why should anyone be told to beware of her? And what did N.E. stand for? As she pondered this question, the girl detective kept a sharp watch on her fellow travelers, who were waving and calling out to those on the pier. Most of the people were speaking Dutch, but their speech was generously sprinkled with English and some German. Finally, picking up no clues, Nancy decided to go to her cabin. "Let's see, it's number 128, she recalled. As she went down the steps, the Winschoten left the pier and started on her voyage to New York. When Nancy reached her stateroom, she opened the door and blinked in surprise. Bess and George were not there, but an attractive, fair-haired girl was seated on one of the 4 beds. She rose immediately and smiled at Nancy. "Hello," she said. "I'm to be one of your roommates." She spoke with a slight accent. "My name is Nelda Detweiler. I'm the niece of the captain." "I'm glad to meet you," Nancy said, shaking hands with the strange girl. "My 2 friends who are sharing this cabin with me should be here in a minute." Nelda explained that she was from Johannesburg, South Africa, and that she had decided rather suddenly to attend college in the United States. "I was accepted immediately," she went on, "and I went to Rotterdam to see my uncle and his family. However, I almost had trouble getting on the ship, because it was booked out far in advance. The captain said there was an extra bed in this cabin, though, and I hope you and your friends don't mind my intruding." Nelda was a beautiful girl and very charming. She had large brown eyes and a soft, musical voice. Nancy liked her at once. However, she was still thinking of the message, "Eware Nancy True" and N.E., and wondered if N.E. could refer to Nelda. Perhaps their new roommate was a spy? "But she's so lovely," Nancy argued with herself. "I just can't believe there's anything dishonest about her." However, Nancy decided to watch Nelda carefully, at least for a while, and to warn Bess and George to be alert too. Aloud, she assured the South African girl that the 4 companions would undoubtedly be very happy together. "Oh, thank you," Nelda said and smiled. "I was afraid you might object to a stranger joining your group." Soon Bess and George arrived. Nancy introduced them to Nelda Detweiler and explained how she happened to be rooming with them. "How nice!" Bess exclaimed, and George smiled at the girl. There was a knock on the door. George, who was nearest, opened it. A man walked in and introduced himself as Heinrich. "I'm your cabin steward," he said, and looked intensely at each girl. His eyes rested on Nelda for a longer time than on the others. Nancy wondered if there was any significance in this. "Anything I can do for you, young ladies?" Heinrich asked. "Not just now, thank you," Nancy replied. The steward was forced to back into the hall because the luggage was arriving. Several suitcases were brought in by a porter. As the girls tried to stow them away, he set a brass-bound steamer trunk down in the middle of the floor. Across the front of it were 2 large initials, N.D. Nancy tipped the porter, who left. Then she turned to Nelda. "This must be your trunk," she said. "I have a similar one, but this isn't mine." Nelda turned to look at the piece of luggage. "No, I didn't bring a trunk." Bess giggled. "There must be a 3rd N.D. on board." Nancy went to the door. "I'll try to catch the porter and tell him to take this one back," she said, and hurried outside into the corridor. It was crowded with baggage and passengers, and Nancy had to move slowly. The porter was not in sight, but just as Nancy was about to give up, she heard loud talking from around the corner of a cross corridor. "You took my trunk to the wrong cabin," a man declared. "I saw you, and there were instructions on it to put it in the hold. Now please get it out of there and take it downstairs." "Certainly, sir," another man replied. "Will you come with me and identify it, please?" The first man mumbled something that Nancy could not understand, but she was sure the man was talking about the trunk in number 128. She tried to make her way past suitcases and bundles to clear up the mistake, but by the time she reached the spot, no one was there. "That's strange," Nancy thought. "Maybe they weren't talking about the trunk in my cabin after all." She went back and found that more suitcases had arrived in the meantime. The mystery trunk, however, had not been picked up yet, nor had her own trunk been delivered. "I almost found the owner," Nancy said to the others. "What do you mean?" George asked. Nancy told them about the conversation she had overheard, but, she explained, she had not found the man. She walked over to the trunk to examine it, thinking she might notify the owner. There were no stickers on it, nor any identification or handling instructions. Nancy frowned. "This is really strange," she said. "I wonder if someone removed the tags, and if so, why?" End of Chapter 1.